Dubai is definitely now a crypto hub, whatever way you look at it. I think Abu Dhabi is becoming more of an institutional crypto hub. Again, the combination is very good. But I think because that regulatory journey has happened, now you're starting to see a level of comfort arriving. But you're going to need to see high quality companies set up there. And I think that's the next leg of the journey. And that's why we're going to set up.
Are many companies that have set up in UAE going back to the US?
So to your question about people moving back, I don't think so. It's easy to forget how important the US is from a capital markets perspective. The effect in the US is so big.
They are more willing to take a risk as well, versus the UAE, they would be more patient. Joining me on the show today is Tim Grant, former head of EMEA at Galaxy Digital, former CEO of SIX Digital Exchange, and now founder of Deus Ex. Before we get into the interview, a couple of things. Please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow Financial Fox on social media if you haven't done it so already. You will find all the links in the descriptions. Your support is crucial to grow the channel so we can educate more people about crypto. Also, please remember that the content on the show is for informational purposes only and not intended as financial advice. As always, do your own research, level up your skills, and be accountable for your own decisions. Financial Fox is a media partner of Ordinance Paris, XYZ Paris, NFT Paris, RWA Paris. All these events are happening in Paris on the 13th and 14th of February. If you don't have a ticket and you want to attend, you can use the code FOX for a free ticket. And don't forget, we are also partner of the largest Bitcoin conference happening in Vegas next year from the 27th to the 29th of May. You can use the code FOX for a 10% discount on your ticket. With that being said, let's get to the interview. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hi, Steffi. Very, very good indeed. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. So got you on the show finally, and I wanted you to share some of your insight and experience as well about all the work that you have done in the Middle East and also across different countries, and how you see the US now playing the catch up, right, with the countries like obviously the Middle East, we said, but also other countries that have been at the forefront of innovation, especially when it comes down to crypto. My first question is going to be, how did you get Orange Pill?
Everybody has a genesis story, don't we? Yes. So on the morning of March 19th, 2015, I knew nothing about Bitcoin, blockchain, or digital assets or anything like that at all. In fact, if you had asked me that morning about blockchain, I'm not even sure, or Bitcoin, I'm not even sure I would have known what to say. But during that time, I was working at O'Connor, which is a large multi-strat hedge fund, UBS's hedge fund unit. And I got invited to a tour of Silicon Valley to see all the latest new exciting technologies. And there was a whole bunch of different ones, but notably that day on the 19th of March, it was Coinbase and Ripple that really basically orange pill. In fact, if I was to really put it down, there's two people. It was Chris Larson at Ripple, which is very topical given how fast Ripple has moved up recently. And today, in fact, but also Fred and Brian over at Coinbase, who, during that day explained to me what blockchain was and how it worked and the sort of problems it could solve. And then later on with Coinbase, it was really about crypto and Bitcoin in particular. And at that point, Ethereum wasn't really a thing yet in any material sense. So it was enough at the time to make me realize that here we had the tools to help us re-engineer our financial services to a better, truly for the 21st. It was so obvious to me right from the outset. And I really thought about it more from a blockchain perspective. Yeah. A $6.5 billion multi-strat hedge fund on Wall Street has a lot of connectivity with a lot of different firms, and reconciling what that hedge fund does, especially if it trades a lot, which we did. So we're trading all over the world, 5 days a week, constantly. How do you reconcile what we've done with everybody we trade with? And that was a very, very expensive thing to do. And it is still a hugely expensive thing to do in financial services, is just to make sure we agree on what happened. It's that simple. And when I saw blockchain for the first time, I saw a future where we didn't have to do that reconciliation, where we would all know what we needed to know at the point at which a transaction had happened, and we wouldn't have to go and figure it out. And to me, that immediately, that day, the 19th of March, 2015, I saw that future, and I've never looked back since that day. I bought Bitcoin that day at $200. And so, yeah, here I am a decade later, still fighting the good fight, Steffi.
Still holding?
Yeah, I might have sold some along the way, yeah.
It's interesting because you are the first person that actually is telling me I was immediately understood how the technology could make a difference in my work, rather than I immediately understood how Bitcoin was going to be the game changer for monetary policy and, for the financial system. And it's quite interesting because you, at the time, you were working in financial markets. So you could have seen the speculative or the digital assets aspect rather than the technology. But yeah, you did the other way around.
Yeah, and it took me, honestly, it took me quite a while to get to that crypto understanding. So I was only 50% orange pilled that day, because it was very obvious to me from an infrastructure perspective that this was going to change everything. I'm still partially mystified why it hasn't been so more impactful beyond just sort of classic crypto applications. But yeah, over the next kind of 3 years, and it did take me that long. It took me till 2018, 19 when I finally really understood the crypto side of it and that monetary side of it, that economic side of it, and that macroeconomic impact. But yeah, everyone goes on their own journey, and that's the thing. You gotta go on a journey on this one. You sort of either you're in it or you're not. It's a funny space to be in. So, but I'm glad that I went about it that way, because it did immediately, literally the next day, I started looking into it, and I've never stopped looking at blockchain since that day.
That's kind of the effect that it does. Same with me. When I understood and something clicked, then you don't leave the space. You want to be part of this movement. Definitely, I think that's what, you have experienced. So how did you move into the digital asset space?
Well, I kind of had a transition. So I started at 3, which is very much enterprise blockchain. And, that was the early phases of big financial institutions looking to assess how blockchain would be used in the future. But at that time, this is 2015, 16, there was a persona non grata. You weren't even allowed to talk about crypto in those meetings. That wasn't a thing. And that's actually true. It was that black and white. Do not mention crypto. So we would talk to, we did some of the early central bank digital currency projects with the Bank of Canada and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which was really interesting. Early bond issuance stuff, early trade finance work. We did a lot of that, but it wasn't really crypto. And then I left R3 and we started our own company, and that was selling blockchain applications to regulated financial services. Again, it wasn't really crypto. It was effectively trying to solve that reconciliation problem that I mentioned that we figured out. That didn't work out. And actually, interestingly, my transition point was probably Six Digital Exchange. While I was CEO of that in Switzerland, that was 2020 to 2022, roughly. The initial formulation of Six Digital Exchange was an exchange for digital securities, digital debt, digital equity, digital structured products, that sort of thing. So again, not crypto, but I think that was the point over 2021 that a lot of the financial institutions started to realize that their clients were asking for services and products in the crypto space. So they had to start paying attention. And Six at that time definitely started thinking about more crypto activity, crypto exchanges. So I personally was already there in crypto by then, but institutionally, that's when I found it started to change. And that was interesting to watch a big and frankly, an organization like Six, a classic financial market infrastructure provider, right? Think of New York Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, et cetera, very much in that mold. Quite, 20th century, quite slow, quite mature as a business, tough to really grow materially in those sorts of businesses. So very, very slow to adapt. But actually, I found that that desire to adapt start to increase and start to be open. And that was the moment that I thought, okay, I can now be in crypto and institutional.
Yeah.
That was the key, that you want to do both, because I have nothing against retail crypto and nothing against DeFi at all. In fact, we have a DeFi unit within Deus Ex Capital called Solstice Labs. But the real interest for me was always, can you get the big financial institutions to engage in this space? Can you get the net new investment dollars from traditional, that's when we'll see huge increase in activity and opportunity. And that was where things started to change. So basically, Six Digital Exchange, we delivered what we needed to do during that time. And then Galaxy came along. And for those people in the space will be well aware, Galaxy's a classic sort of one of the bigger players. People call it the Goldman Sachs of crypto, and that's probably not far off the truth in terms of the kind of quality of people that are there and the businesses they have, the investment banking, asset management, sales and trading, technology, the whole thing. And so that was really now a chance to get squarely into crypto. Like, there's not even a question at that point. You're very much in the space. But it's interesting that, before that, it wasn't so obvious that could be a consistent thing, that would land and that the institutions would be there. And I think by then it's clear that they would. And now in 2024 going into 2025, I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind that the institution's coming. And so taking 10 years, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, interesting. And over all those years, you have been spending a lot of time in the UAE. You told me on different occasions. So what I wanted to ask you is really how the Middle East has changed in terms of attitude to crypto.
Well, I think there's a bigger, even before getting to that, there's a bigger story about how it's changed in general. I spent first-hand time in the UAE back around the mid-2000s, and it was as anyone will tell you who's been there back then, like it's night and day compared to what the UAE looks like now. Dubai was not even close to looking and feeling as vibrant and big and impressive and as it is today. Back then, it was still a bit of a backwater. Now, that back then there was a lot of oil dollars were already there. It felt like the crisis of '08, at least from where I was sitting, it was the crisis of '08 where you started to see that Saudi and Middle East money make its way into traditional finance. I remember, I think Credit Suisse took a big investment. Maybe Morgan Stanley took a big investment. Big financial institutions started taking money from there, right? And it was Qatar and Saudi and UAE. And that was I think the first moment we started to realize, wow, there's a lot of money over there. There's a lot of investment over there, and there's the skills are starting to be in place to assess that. But I think even back then there was this kind of feeling, if you were in the West, that you could just fly into the UAE, tell your story, put your pitch there, get a bunch of money and leave. And I think what's changed now is the talent, the level of education, the sophistication of the UAE, but also in the Middle East in general, has gone up. So those jurisdictions are sending all their people to the best universities all over the world. They're being employed by the best companies all over the world, and then they're coming back there. And so you can't think of the UAE and the Middle East in general as not sophisticated. I don't think that's true. I think they are sophisticated. They understand how investment works. They've been through cycles now. And I think it's an important jurisdiction when it comes to assessing opportunities. The second thing is that there's clearly been an element of liberalization, right? There's no question. Look at Saudi in particular and how that's changed and is still changing. So there's more openness, whereas before that was perhaps a little bit more closed, for historical reasons. So you have the capital, and that's only increased, and you see, oil money has really continued to flow in. And so they have very full coffers. They have sophisticated people that they can draw upon, and they're open and more liberal. Well, there you've kind of got the magic ingredients. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is, I think it's fair to say that the Middle East is looking to make a mark over the next few decades in global financial services, particularly in financial services. It's not just that, but obviously that's an area that we focus on. And when you go there, and I started really going there about 3 years ago, very consistently, first when I was at Galaxy and now with Deus Ex Capital, you realize that the rhetoric locally is not empty. It's very, very real. There's a real intent to bring talent in, to invest, to grow, and to be an important fixture in the next leg of the global financial services journey. And I think what they've realized, and I agree with them, I think they're right, is that this is a good time to do that. And the tools like crypto and digital assets are, if you can really leverage those, that's when you get to accelerate into that next part of the journey. And so it's interesting to me that the timing, that even 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been quite the same. So that's what we've heard. And when you hear that Abu Dhabi loves to call, they've got the new tagline, the capital of capital. Okay. That's a pretty big statement that you intend on being an important piece of the global picture when it comes to capital movement. New York, London, Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. They're all part of the fabric, but you would never have really said Abu Dhabi or Dubai. But I think the goal for them is to get to that point, no question. And so the timing, I think, is really exciting for them to be the magnet to be able to go and actually generate that outcome.
And Dubai has the reputation to be more like the wild crypto Web3 token hub, whereas Abu Dhabi is considered more the grown-up capital of digital assets. Is that true?
I don't think that's an unfair way of looking at it. They definitely have slight cultural differences, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that really at the end of the day, Abu Dhabi has the control of the kind of the financial element of the UAE. They are by far the biggest and have by far the biggest coffers. They are the grown up. And I think there's no surprise that you're seeing a lot of big institutional players go there. I mean, you look at Abu Dhabi Finance Week, which is next week in them. I'm looking forward to speaking at that conference. The list of people who are attending in terms of CEOs is really impressive. I mean, you've got people like Ray Dalio, you've got the CEO of UBS and other big banks. You've got really, it's starting to feel like Saudi's FII, Davos in the desert, and a little bit like Davos. It's now starting to feel like a focal point for the big financial industry players, which I think tells you that it's evolved. Now, you don't see anything quite like that in Dubai, but I also think you need in the digital asset space a community like that Dubai energy. You need that more youthful vibe, that perhaps slightly more entrepreneurial flair, a little bit more risk taking. And I think what makes the UAE particularly interesting is the fact that you've got them both. Actually, I think that it's not one or the other. So, and they're only an hour and a half away, as everybody knows. It's easy to drive from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, and hopefully they'll put a train in there soon. It'll be even quicker. And a lot of people work in Dubai that live in Abu Dhabi and vice versa. So that it's the same country. You've got to keep remembering it's actually the same country. They're not two different countries. They're just two different cities or states. So I think that combination is what makes it powerful. And if you travel to the UAE, you'll be able to meet a representative of everything, all the way from highly regulated, buttoned up kind of traditional financial services to the other end of like really out there DeFi projects. You can find them all, which I think is why people are gravitating.
100%. I mean, we know that the UAE sovereign wealth funds are the most largest and most influential in the world, primarily, we said, because of the oil and gas resources. But at the same time, they are quite conservative. So just wanted to get your insight, perhaps. Are they ready to embrace crypto, you think?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Steffi, actually. I think that, and you're right to ask the question, because, let's just say that large institutional wealth and large institutional capital can be more patient and can take longer than we can all be solvent, right? It's that classic sort of adage. And I think it's a broader question actually about how, institutional readiness to participate. But just sticking with the UAE, I think what's interesting, and we're making a very specific bet here actually within our own portfolio. One of our companies is called Core Prime, which I run, and it's very much actually tapping into your question. It's like, when will the large institutional allocators be ready to participate? Because one of the problems, and again, it's very relevant to this capital of capital thing that Abu Dhabi likes to say about their positioning. In crypto and digital assets, we have a large deficit of risk capital. What that means is, in traditional finance, institutional trading, and it's really important to have a vibrant and liquid institutional trading market in order for a market to be efficient, for then to go from spot to derivatives go to structured products. It then allows corporates and wealth managers to participate. And that's been playing out for decades. That's a very well-trodden path. The problem we have in crypto is we don't have prime brokers in the same way that we have in traditional finance. They're all attached to large banks, and they can all fund themselves through bank balance sheets, be that through deposits or from Fed window or, central bank funding or from bond markets. They can get funding. In crypto, that does not exist. You don't see Goldman Sachs prime brokerage operating in this space, and we don't anticipate that they will for a few more years. They will eventually, but they're not going to be for a few more years. So how do you solve that problem today? What you need to do is kind of do a little bit what you do in the reinsurance markets, which also aren't funded by bank balance sheets. They are funded by institutional allocators, and they've been doing that for a long, long time. So we need to modify our approach in crypto and think, how are we going to get the large sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, the insurance companies, the family offices to allocate risk capital to allow us to provide leverage into the market? And then you can get growth. And if you get net new investment from them, and crucially, that means that we don't just recycle our own capital within crypto, because it's very easy for us to do that, to stake and restake and restake and restake. And I think everybody who's in this market knows where that ends up. You can't do that, right? You get stuck eventually. But if you start to bring in net new capital, and I'm talking billions of fresh capital, then you'll get net new participants. You'll build new pieces of infrastructure. The whole ecosystem can grow. And that's how I think we get from, the $3 trillion asset class to a $30 trillion asset class. But I don't think you can get there if you don't have that net new allocation. So your question is exactly the one that we need to solve for. So I think in the UAE, if you look at because you know that these jurisdictions are very controlled top to bottom, right? They're controlled by the ruling families. That's how this works. And that's how it will work in our lifetimes. And that means not just capital is controlled, but the regulation is controlled by effectively the same organizations. I think the fact that, and you alluded to this at the very beginning, that Abu Dhabi and Dubai have made efforts over the last 5 to 7 years to position themselves as relatively open. And especially in Dubai, we've seen a huge influx. Dubai is definitely now a crypto hub, whatever way you look at it. I think Abu Dhabi is becoming more of an institutional crypto hub. And I think that's again, the combination is very good. But I think because that regulatory journey has happened, now you're starting to see a level of comfort arriving. But you're going to need to see high quality companies set up there. And I think that's the next leg of the journey. And that's why we're going to set up in Abu Dhabi. We actually have an office in ADGM. But the whole point of this is to go to Mubadala or go to ADQ or go to those big sovereign wealth funds and tell them a story that's as buttoned up as it would be if it was an institutional play.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
It's interesting. It's basically you are saying, first of all, regulation has to be positive and welcoming. Then you need education and kind of like advisory to get these people on board, but also infrastructure. And that's what, for example, with your company you're doing. So kind of like putting together all these pieces, then you can go and offer proper solution to a capital that is more patient, is less risky, but ready to go when everything is lined up.
Yeah, and I think that there's another X factor though, and I think that's right. And I think that's true of any jurisdiction. You get comfort with the regulation. Companies feel comfortable coming in because there's clarity. The thing that's missing, you said education, I think that's right. When you go historically, when I started in this space, people were worried about whether the technology would work.
Yeah.
Whether it would be scalable and whether it would be hackable. Well, now I don't think there's any debate. This stuff is scalable, secure where you want it to be. Trillions of dollars are locked up in all of this, and it works. And I think that's been proven. Then you've got, it's not regulated. And I think now, especially in light of what's happened in the US, every important jurisdiction on the planet, one way or another, the direction of travel is to a more accommodative, more clarity, and that's good. So net, I'm not saying that we don't have a part of the journey to go, but I wouldn't bet against that anymore. So it's not really about regulation. I think we do need harmonization, but regulation isn't going to be the problem. Actually, the biggest impediment is actually education and mindset. It's whether the mindset exists to think beyond the 20th century shackles that we have. Hard to leave the 20th century model behind because it was so important in generating the today that we live in. But it's not fit for purpose for the tomorrow that we need to get to. And that's why we need new financial services, new tools, more democratization, broader access, all this stuff. But now I think that X factor is, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, having had the ability to talk to policymakers on the regulatory front, having ability to talk to, important individuals who have power and who have say and sway, that the mindset is open. And actually in the US is a great example where the mindset was not open for the last 4 years. And look how much difference that's going to make. And so I do think that Abu Dhabi and Dubai made the right call very deliberately a few years ago, and now they're being the beneficiaries of that. And look at Abu Dhabi Finance Week, which is happening concurrent to Bitcoin MENA at the same time. You got two, your institutional one and your crypto one, and that's welcomed and open. That's kind of a big deal, I think. So it's exciting to see that progress.
100%. Now, my question would be, we have seen the US now being especially, with the new Trump government being really pro-crypto. They want to be the Bitcoin capital, right? Are many companies that have set up in the UAE going back to the US, you think?
So this is obviously the big question that a lot of us are thinking about right now. I don't think anybody would say that they could see what happening before it happened. No one saw that coming, that it would be such a decisive Trump victory, that it would be such an obvious statement from the American people one way or another that they want crypto. And I think that's what happened. Yeah, Mike Novogratz, my former boss, often talks about this, that there were 50, 60 million people in the US that own crypto. How is that not an important constituency to appeal to, especially when it's quite young? Well, I think Trump figured that out, and that no doubt made an effect. I'm not saying that's the reason he won, but I'm saying it's certainly a factor. So no one was expecting this. So no one had really sat and thought through what the implications would be if this had happened, because no one thought this was going to happen. So it's kind of happening now. Everyone's like, what does this mean? Now, I think, I've sat in Singapore, in the UAE, in the UK, and in Europe over the last few years and talked publicly. In fact, I talked to the Treasury Select Committee in the UK, actually the week after FTX went down, which was unfortunate timing. And I said, look, the US is now closed. This is an opportunity for the UK or Europe or the UAE or Singapore or Hong Kong to keep moving and generate an opportunity to get in front. Now, I don't think all jurisdictions took that seriously and moved as fast as they could have. And you now know that they're saying, oh, no, we should have done that, because the US, as soon as it changes its course, it's going to go fast. And why? Because it's the biggest capital market by far in the world. And the influence, it's easy to forget how important the US is from a capital markets perspective. If you don't know that, you might assume that everywhere else kind of can counteract that, but it really can't. Like, the effect in the US is so big.
Exactly. And also the capital, they are more willing to take a risk as well, versus the UAE, they would be more patient.
Absolutely. So to your question about people moving back, I don't think so. I think it's more that people who were not going to set up in the US will now set up. So we are going to do that. So Core Prime, great example. Until about a month ago, we were thinking, we'll just stay away from the US for a while. Now, literally today, we made the decision we're going to go and set up a Delaware entity, and we're going to go and start doing business in the US. And I think I'm not the only one to be having those sorts of conversations. And I think that is going to have an effect. It will take a little while to come through, but watch how quickly innovation starts to shift over there. Now, I think the challenge for jurisdictions like the UAE and the UK and Europe and Singapore, etc., is to, like, what are you going to do now? Like, you definitely have to lean into this now, because if you don't, within 5 years, the US will hoover this up. Look what happened with mining. As soon as China said no mining, the US, within 6 months, was the biggest jurisdiction for mining on the planet. I think that tells you how fast the US can move. And to your point, they're willing to take risk and generate return. So I don't think it changes the UAE trajectory, but the UAE can't slow down.
Yeah. And what about the UK? Are they going to follow, or are they planning to lead on something?
Look, I think the UK back in, I think it was 2022, early 2022, they made a statement, and this is during the Rishi Sunak administration, that they wanted to be a global crypto hub. The problem is they didn't really follow through on anything. It was empty, as it turns out. And I think more statements were made recently, similar. But the problem is, if there's no action, it's all just talk. And I fear for the UK that this isn't going to make its way to a top priority, and I fear that they're going to be slowly left behind. And I don't want that as a British person, but living in London, I would love to see that, but I just don't see it. I think Europe has a bit of the same problem, although it's funny, you see people talk about this at the moment, like, where's the innovation in Europe? It's not really, where's the biggest companies in the world coming from Europe? They're really not. And that needs to harmonize across MiCA and all of that. So if the Europe's not going to accelerate and the UK isn't going to catch up, then it is an opportunity for other jurisdictions to move beyond the US. And I think the UAE is really uniquely placed, because Singapore, still not sure. Hong Kong, there's issues with Hong Kong. We're all aware. It's like, is it China? Is it Hong Kong? Not so obvious. So where else do you go? I actually think the UAE has a huge shot, because I unfortunately think the UK is not going to take it.
That's sad, but that's kind of like the reality. You talked briefly about innovation, where the next innovation is actually. And if we look at one sector that has been really innovative is this energy infrastructure, which has been really hot at the moment. And Bitcoin miners are actually playing a bigger role here, especially with their move, into also AI data center. I think I saw recently Galaxy raising $300 million to fund the expansion of one of the Texas data center, right? What are your thoughts on this energy infrastructure, Bitcoin mining space?
Yeah. Look, I think it's fascinating how quickly that has evolved over the last few months. It's really that, not a few months ago, it wouldn't really have been the talk of the town that everything was going to shift in the mining space to more of an AI, focus. What's interesting to me about in this respect, in the UAE in particular, if you look at Abu Dhabi, they're very uniquely placed because they have the oil production, they have a lot of assets, they have a lot of space, they have a lot of solar for obvious reasons, and they can control things end to end. They can, no wonder Phoenix, which is now listed on the Abu Dhabi Stock Exchange, is sort of becoming one of the bigger players in the space. And you can see the announcements coming out from the UAE on AI as well. I just don't think it seems very obvious to me that they would be quite well placed to figure out how to take advantage of this combination of any energy infrastructure, AI, and mining, and it all comes together. So that you can see that happening in real time. So this is another place that has, it has a few years to pan out. Like this reminds me a little bit of where we were a few years ago in blockchain. It's not crystal clear how this is going to pan out yet. Fortunes could be made and lost on big bets on this right now, but I wouldn't bet against I wouldn't bet against Abu Dhabi to be able to pull these threads together, because you need the capital and the intent, and they have the capital and the intent.
Yeah, exactly. Tell us more about the use X, because you make investment, right, in the space. Where are you looking? What are you focusing on?
We like that, as I said at the beginning, we like at the intersection of kind of crypto and institutional. That when we like to operate where there's an opportunity to bring net new capital into the space in general. So Core Prime, our lending unit, is a great example of where we're investing to basically allow that capital to come in a regulated, safe way and allow institutional players to trade more. That's a no-brainer. Solstice Labs, our DeFi unit, we call it our institutional DeFi unit, because we want to be able to go to, again, those big institutional players and say, hey, here's a DeFi opportunity that you can understand, and that you can understand the risks and you can engage with. And it's net new investment. And that's the theme that we're very focused on. I do think it's very interesting, and there's fertile ground to build in this sort of what they call the deep in space, this decentralized physical infrastructure. Always the picks and shovels, right? What are people going to need to facilitate the market of the future? That's kind of where we think about it. We did have a thesis about the intersection of gaming and Web3. That was at one point. I'm not sure how well fast that's panning out in the end, but things can change quarter on quarter. That's what's extraordinary about this space. It's the most reflexive asset class ever. When it's going up, everyone wants to be involved in it, and when it's going down, everybody gets out, which is kind of the wrong way around. The one thing that's certain outside of those cycles is you have to build infrastructure. And so I have the scars of having been too early on that infrastructure, and you fail. You're too early, you're going to fail. Too late, someone else has gained the money. You kind of have to time it. So for us, it's about looking at those infrastructure opportunities. How do we get from ETFs to derivatives to structured products as bankable securities? How do we really expand on stable coins and yield bearing elements of that? Because we're so missing these pieces. The basic financial primitives of being able to lend and borrow and collateralize things. A lot of financial services is around collateralization and repo and lending and borrowing. It's what people don't understand. Like, that's what is the lifeblood of traditional finance. We don't have that in crypto yet. So for me, I look at the old world and the new world and figure out, okay, what should the new world look like and what do we need to build to get there? And that's where we will focus our time and attention over the next year or so.
Okay, great, Tim. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.